still hearing? No. It means that I can go live.
a pleasure to be here. I want to say a pleasant good morning to those here in attendance and to those watching by different social media platforms, listening on the radio and on television. Before we start, I'd like to have a word of prayer by the Honorable Kenneth Hodge, Minister for Home Affairs.
Thank you very much, Premier. Could we ask that we all stand for a word of prayer, please? Dear Lord, we come before you this morning, asking for your blessings upon this nation as we prepare to embark on the reopening of our tourism sector from November 1. We ask particularly your blessings on our healthcare workers, our taxi drivers, our hospitality workers, our police officers, and all those persons that will be dealing with our visitors as they come back to our shores. We ask your blessings upon this island, as particularly we know the hardships that we are encountering with the lockdown of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we ask that you put a special seed of blessing that as we cope with this reopening, and we ask that we keep this COVID-19 pandemic from our shores as we welcome back our visitors. We especially ask for persons to adhere to all the various protocols that have been put in place to ensure the safety of our Anguillian workers and our visitors. And we ask that this season coming up will be a productive and blessed one for Anguilla and its people. We ask these blessings in your name. Amen.
So good morning again. Thank you, Minister Hodge. It's a pleasure. I just want to say we have with us different media. We have Nat Hodge from the Anguillian. We have Lloyd Gums with Lloyd Live. And we have Thoughtful Media. We have Mr. Pickering and Dawn Hodge. She is with the Daily Herald. So it's a pleasure to have everyone here this morning. And this panel, we also have Radio Anguilla. Can't forget them. We want to talk today about our reopening, which is coming starting November 1st. We are in a phased program. And we also have Class FM here with us. And we thank everyone for coming out. Show how important this is for the people of Anguilla and Anguillians in the diaspora so that we can get the message out. Sitting here at the front table, I just want everyone to introduce themselves, and before we move on, we'll start on my left.
I'm Aisha Andrin, Chief Medical Officer and Epidemiologist.
Good morning, everyone. Foster Rogers, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Health.
Good morning, everyone. Hayden Hughes, Minister of Tourism and Infrastructure.
Good morning. Quincy Gomes-Marie, Parliamentary Secretary, Economic Development, Natural Resources, IT, and Tourism.
Good morning, everyone. And Diara Valerie, Ministry of Tourism. Tourism Unit, Research Officer.
Good morning, everyone. Shelia Rogers Webb, the Manager of Corporate Affairs at the Anguilla Tourist Board.
Thank you all. You see, we brought out the heavy hitters. And you know me, Ellis Webster, Minister of Health. The Ministry of Health, essentially, we want everyone to know that the health of our people is still paramount. It's what we're most concerned about, but we understand that it is necessary to have a balance between health and the economy. The Director General of the World Health Organization, WHO, recently stated that stopping outbreaks comes down to the basics of public health and disease control, which include testing and treating, isolating and treating patients, and tracing and quarantining their contacts. Ministry of Tourism announced rolling out of phase 2 of the tourism reopening for international visitors traveling to Anguilla. In that release, the bubble concept, which is intended to allow properties to safely offer their guests access to a variety of approved amenities, services, and activities while they stay in place, was also introduced. The Ministry of Health would like to reassure the general public that all plans and activities underway to support the reopening of the tourism sector are in accordance with the approved protocols. Furthermore, these protocols are based on the same basic principles of testing, social distancing, hand hygiene, quarantine or isolation, and contact tracing that have kept Anguilla safe to date. We all know that the last confirmed case of COVID-19 in Anguilla was 7 months ago, and since then the capacity to test, isolate, treat, and trace the disease has significantly increased. As per the WHO guidance, testing capacity and the ability to identify persons infected with the virus is the first priority. Government established national testing capacity for COVID-19 PCR testing with a turnaround time of less than 2 hours, started at the end of May. Prior to that, suspected cases had to be sent to CARPHA, the Caribbean Public Health Agency in Trinidad, with a turnaround time of about 4 to 7 days. So we're doing much better. This has enabled the government to ramp up testing considerably with the ability to test and screen every person that enters the country. Furthermore, it's now required for persons to submit a negative COVID-19 PCR test result 3 to 5 days prior to visiting Anguilla. Without this negative test, persons are denied permission to travel to Anguilla. Over the past months, sound quarantine or isolation protocols have been developed, which have enabled the island to repatriate more than 500 persons safely to date. Furthermore, the quarantine period has reduced from 14 to 10 days for persons coming from low-risk areas where there's less than 0.2% prevalence, using a testing algorithm grounded in sound public health science. The ministry has also increased its human resources to support the surveillance and monitoring to meet the upcoming demands as visitors return to our shores. As relates to tourism product, we are guided by safe public health principles and practices. Formal submissions of protocols and standard operating procedures as part of a safe certification process for operators within the accommodation sector, including hoteliers and villa operators. Strict adherence to the pre-arrival testing protocols and vetting of results. Further expansion of the laboratory capacity with the assistance of the Governor's Office, Public Health England, and the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, FCDO, specifically to support a safe reopening. Identification of COVID-19 surveillance focal points and liaisons to actively surveil and monitor guests and report to the Ministry of Health. Training and or certification of personnel in infection prevention and control. This includes ferryboat operators, ground transport, port of entry workers, house cleaning, hospitality staff. To date, more than 500 persons have been trained. Promotion of protocols for activities that can be conducted away from the public at large, while still ensuring adequate physical distancing in adequately ventilated spaces. This would include beach access, outdoor dining, outdoor exercise, water sports, scuba diving, offshore fishing, and golfing. It is of paramount importance to Anguilla's survival that we understand that while the principles and practices to protect us against COVID-19 have not changed, Anguilla and the rest of the world are now facing increasingly negative economic impacts due to the pandemic. And this has necessitated an adjustment in mindset, one away from shutting out the outside world, which occurred when we closed our borders on March 20th of 2020, to one that conceives of a world beyond coexistence with the virus, to a place where Anguilla's health and economy may thrive despite the virus. And so now more than ever, it will take all of us to ensure that Anguilla emerges from this very trying period prouder, stronger, and freer. We have to practice the basic precautionary measures, including social distancing, hand hygiene, and cough etiquette. We have to adhere to the approved protocols, comply with conditions of quarantine and movement restrictions, refrain from stigmatization of repatriated persons and guests, refrain from the spread of misinformation, and have thoughtful consideration for our neighbors, our community, and our island. The Ministry of Health, the Government of Anguilla maintain that the health and safety of the nation continues to be of utmost priority. We will continue to provide timely updates at www.beatcovid19.ai. Persons with any questions or concerns should call the ministry hotlines at 264-476-7627 or 264-476-SOAP or 264-584-4263. That is 264-584-HAND. I want to thank you for your attention, and I will now turn this over to our next presenter, who will be the Minister of Tourism, the Honorable Hayden Hughes. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and it's good to be here before you once again. As you know, sometime recently we embarked on a press conference to update and inform the general public as it relates to where we are with tourism. We are in unprecedented times. We have never in our lifetime seen a virus that have taken over the world as this one. As we all know, tourism is the breadwinner of everyone in Anguilla. And I dare say that tourism is the only industry in Anguilla, even as we seek to diversify the economy of Anguilla. And this is the first time in our history where tourism had to partner with the Department of Health and the Ministry of Health in order to safely ensure that our people can be safe while creating economic opportunities for the people of Anguilla. As we know, we launched phase one of our phase reopening on August 21st, 2020, and that envisioned that we would allow the villas to allow guests to come to Anguilla and stay in place. We have always said that on November 1st, we will launch phase two, and we are in the heels of relaunching phase two. Phase two envisions that all of the hospitality product in Anguilla can now reopen so far as it presents protocols and standard operating procedures that will be accepted by the Ministry of Health and the Environmental Department, and they will receive a safe certificate, and thus they will be able to embark on the business opportunities that come with tourism. As we all know, Anguilla does not cater for all inclusive, and we have a very unique product in that persons that come to Anguilla really and truly get the opportunity to enjoy all that Anguilla has to offer. So we have come a long way. We have gone from an island which was completely closed down to an island which is opening up in a safe and, I dare say, unprecedented way. And on the 1st of November, we will be receiving our first hotel guests since March of 2020. And that, to my mind, should be celebrated. Be that as it may, there are certain protocols that tourists that are arriving to our shows and those Anguillians who are returned to our shows have to adhere to, and we'll expand on them and expound on them as we move along. At the end of this presentation, we hope that everyone will be satisfied with the answers, and we hope that we can give more answers than questions. So if you have any questions, whether you're listening here, whether the press here today, or those that are listening on Facebook Live, on Lloyd's Live, or in Anguilla, all those questions, we are here ready and able to answer those questions, as we have everyone from all the important players in the ministries of health and tourism and the Anguilla Tourist Board here at this table that can answer any question that you may have. At the end of it, we want everyone to enjoy the Anguillan experience because we are still tranquility wrapped in blue. And this is one country where you can lose the crowd and find yourself. So I look forward to all of your questions as we move forward today. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. That is a good tagline. Lose the crowd and find yourself. That's. Now we'll have a presentation by the Parliamentary Secretary, Honorable Quincy Gums Marie, who is also the czar for this tourism product.
A warm welcome and pleasant good morning to our invited guests, media teams, listening and viewing audience. It gives me great pleasure to be here this morning to discuss our Phase 2 reopening. As I follow off of the Minister of Tourism, I am very minded that in our reopening, it cannot just be a reopening for reopening's sake, but it must be a reopening of a competitive product. And in order to meet our objective of providing a safe and competitive product, we have offered training courses free of cost for approximately 500 tourism employees and service providers. As mentioned by the Premier, this includes housekeepers, ground, air, and sea operators, concierge personnel, and restaurant operators, to name a few. This training is still available and free to the public. We have certified almost 100 businesses who have either been given the seal of Safe Environment Certified or Safe Environment Approved. A Safe Environment Certified business is a certification awarded only to properties and restaurants which have received specific training and have met all necessary health requirements and whose protocols have been approved. Safe Environment Approved is a form of certification awarded only to services or activity providers which have received training and or attended sensitizing seminars and whose operating protocols have been approved, and this approval comes only from the Ministry of Health. So now to the major question. What is Phase 2? Phase 2 can best be described as a partial reopening, as all persons are invited to our shores and welcomed to lose the crowd and find themselves, so long as they have a negative PCR test prior to arrival. Pre-approval is a key component of Phase 2. Persons can fill out their pre-approval form on iVisitAnguilla.com, where they'll be asked to provide information such as their name, addresses, intended date of arrival and departure, proof of a medical insurance that offers coverage which includes COVID-19, and a negative PCR test, as well as paying any associated fees. At the point of filling out your pre-arrival form, we are able to determine whether you are a short-term or a long-term guest. Short-term guests are persons staying 90 days or less, and long-term guests are persons staying 91 to 65 days, as our Work from Anguilla program is still available. So the fees associated with this is that persons staying less in a pre-approved property for less than 5 days. For an individual, the fee associated is $300. For couples, and that's just 2 persons, $500. And any additional person, be it a family member or traveling group, $250. These fees cover the cost of surveillance, and surveillance is public health surveillance as well as testing. For persons staying 66 days up to 90 days, the single cost is $400 for the individual, $600 for the couple, and $250 thereafter, whether it is a family or a group. The fees remain the same for persons wishing to take advantage of our Work from Anguilla program, where the individual will pay $2,000 and the family, which is a unit up to 4, will pay $3,000 and $250 thereafter. The fees associated with our Work from Anguilla program covers all fees, including digital work permits and extended time to stay in Anguilla. So the process of arrival to Anguilla, after filling out your form and receiving the all clear to arrive, you'll be tested upon arrival and moved through the usual custom and immigration process, then taken to your accommodation to await your results. In order to offer our short-term guests an enhanced stay, they will be allowed to move through guided movements throughout the island using certified services only. Herein lies our bubble concept. Guided movement is a movement in which protocols are used to guide and facilitate all movements of visitors on island. This applies to visitors who are on properties, hotels, villas, etc., for less than 10 to 14 days due to their short-term stay, who will not have the opportunity for freer movement on island. So the question may then arise, what activities can you do in this guided movement process or in this bubble movement process? The activities must be characterized by open space, good ventilation, opportunity to practice social distancing, and also have the option for increased hygienic activity. So these activities include golf, scuba diving, snorkeling, kayaking, glass bottom boats or offshore excursions, offshore private lunches on our quays, dining only at certified restaurants, outdoor yoga or fitness, on-property fitness hikes, and outdoor fitness activities, the use of beach only in the presence of a beach attendant. So these are all activities that must be first certified before offering to guests. This is how our phase 2 will be guided, and we will definitely be answering more questions as our press conference moves on. We'll now take this opportunity to hear from P.S. Rogers, who is the Permanent Secretary of Health.
Thank you very much, Parliamentary Secretary, for introducing us on this side of the table. Let me firstly thank the residents of Anguilla who have been with us and with the Ministry of Health as we sought to introduce policies and regulations geared at stemming the spread of this disease since March. It has been a long time, and we have seen the difficulties other countries have had when imposing regulation that limit your liberties, that limit how you move about countries. And it's not easy. Human beings are social beings who like to move about, who like to talk and correspond with people and drive around and move around. So whenever you impose limitations on movements, it is a difficult time, especially lengthy imposition of these type of movements. In this regard, we have been very successful because the people of Anguilla, have heeded the call to be very careful and very safe. And even persons returning from overseas, Anguillans live in different countries, have performed very well as they protect themselves in different countries. The fact that government has repatriated over 500 persons to date without any major incident, and as of this morning with all negative results, speaks to the strict protocols on repatriation and a highly responsible way in which residents of Anguilla have conducted themselves locally and overseas during the pandemic. As the Parliamentary Secretary has indicated, the government has approved visitors to come to Anguilla under protocols that govern either short-term or long-term stays. The Ministry has always stated, and I contend again, that the country cannot stay closed forever, and that our people must learn some way to coexist with COVID. It is driven by science that we have so closely adhered over the past 9 months, when the health team first suspected that a global crisis would result from the spread of this virus. The Ministry is still a beneficiary of pertinent and timely advice from our development and health partners, as well as colleagues and professionals from all over the world. The Premier mentioned earlier some context and some statements by the WHO. I must dare say as well that proper health and well-being cannot be successful without proper economic well-being. They must go hand in hand and must be done safely and properly. Persons who have lived through the shutdown in March and April and so forth may not have realized that opening will be more difficult than closing. But to date, we recognize that there's anxiety, there certainly is concern, there certainly is, I dare say, more than concern in certain regards in certain quarters. But rest assured that the Ministry of Health is doing its best to advise the government of Anguilla and to advise the public of Anguilla how safely to operate during the reopening process. Testing is a critical part of our protocols. Until such time that tests can identify an infected person on the first day of infection, government will still maintain its 3-test protocol. Test before arrival, test upon arrival, and a third test either 10 or 14 days after, depending on the protocol. There's science behind this, and it's critical that we maintain this policy. To date, we have refused up to 1 person who identified positive from coming to Anguilla. That is to show how successful our process has been. So if you identify a person as positive before they come to Anguilla, they will not get permission to come to Anguilla. The person will have to resolve that case. The case will have to be resolved and test again. And at that point in time when the person is deemed to be negative, then the person can be approved to come to Anguilla, tested a second time here, and then tested a third time to be released from quarantine. It is not easy. We have had our discussions in the ministry, we'd have our discussions at Executive Council, we'd have our discussions within the ministry ourselves. So when you see us here today presenting these protocols and presenting what we have agreed to, rest assured that it has gone with many, many hours, many days of research, many arguments, many difficult words and heated words and discussions, because at the end of the day, we have to be very sure that what we're bringing to the people of Anguilla is something that is sound, something that is fleshed out, and something that we've considered all the angles, and something that's well advised. So with that, Mr. Premier, at this point in time, I turn back over to you.
Thank you, Permanent Secretary Rogers. And that is a, overview of the health side of it. I want to say that this information, can be seen on our website, www.ivisitangwilla.com, and that'll be available as we go along. I forgot earlier to mention in Anguilla, the GAF, he does a great job bringing all of this information also. So forgive my oversight. Thanks for the work that you do. I'd like to have the Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Andrew, give some words now before we get to the Ministry of Tourism.
Morning again, everyone, and I'll be brief because I think the most important things that need to be said have been said, and we would really like to spend the time addressing concerns in this what is sure to be an ongoing discussion as we move through this pandemic. I've had moments in my life, there are moments in your life, difficult moments, where there's some thought that comes to mind. And since for the last couple of weeks, the pervasive thought and feeling for some reason in my head was Darwinian thinking and the theory of evolution. And I think this is most poignant at this point in time as we deal with this pandemic. And to paraphrase, and it is a paraphrase, according to Darwin's Origin of the Species, it is not the most intellectual of the species that survives. It is not the strongest that survives, but the species that survives is the one that is best able to adapt and adjust to the changing environment in which it finds itself. And I think this cannot be understated for this pandemic. We can say with certainty in the Ministry of Health and the government of Anguilla, we really have moved in our response in dealing with this nightmare of a pandemic with a few more gray hairs. But we really moved from safe to safer to safest, and I stand by that even today, right? It has been more than appropriate because to our horror, this pandemic has worsened, even up to this morning, quite unbelievably. And based on that, we have stepped up our game. We have evolved to meet the challenge. From the get-go, we have based our approach on an ironclad public health response that has included from the beginning testing, quarantine isolation protocols, and so on, focusing on persons that were suspected of having the disease. You can think of this first phase when we were dealing with the virus as a kind of a first phase. We well went into lockdown. We emerged extremely well. We had 3 cases, no hospitalizations, no deaths. And this was some 218 days ago, and that's pretty remarkable. And kudos to the public as well for their cooperation and everything that went into this response. Then we were subsequently tasked with repatriation. We had to bring people home, and our response evolved once again to national capacity for testing, whereas most countries in the Caribbean weren't even dreaming of having national capacity at this level that we have been able to achieve. So that allowed us to augment our screening protocol, and we not only including pre-arrival testing, but we had the testing on arrival, and we tested you out of a quarantine period, arguably above and beyond what is the basic requirements of WHO's guidelines, right? We also had a very highly coveted machine. I remember a few months ago, they referred to the cartridges as gold dust. And even last week, my colleagues in St. Martin are saying, how you get that done? How do you have these testing kits still? You know, people are having challenge with that. And thanks to the support of the governor, once again, and the FCO and Public Health England, we've been able to secure and maintain and sustain the national testing capacity to meet the need. And we've not had to step back on our testing. We've been able to augment our testing, right? And this second part, when we were looking at repatriation, we really streamlined the process to quarantine. We had it down to a science. We were even looking at risk stratification of how we deal with persons based on where they were coming from. And then we really saw the evolution of the response into a more intersectoral response as we move from just a health crisis and we start to understand the social implications and the economic implications. First and foremost among those, with the police is supporting not only border security, but the security at the quarantine centers. We've been extremely successful. Our last count was over 500 persons on the 19th of October, and to date, we're up to about 640 as of yesterday. Busy with the quarantining and so on. So where are we today? It's crucial, once again, and we cannot miss that this is no longer a health crisis. It has not been just a health situation for a long time now, and we have to own it. We see that countries such as the US and the countries in Europe are struggling with this pandemic to the detriment of all. And so where are we really? As we move into this new phase when we really have to open up the economy a bit more and even more, right? How are we going into this? First and foremost, we have the same very tight protocols that have kept us safe thus far and have not failed us. And then we have the invaluable experience of the quarantining of 600 persons. It has really brought us from just generic public health guidance to a homegrown approach that's context-specific and that's powerful in the realm of public health. We're not starting from scratch, right? We are moving now into the realm of bringing people in who are tourists. That's the main difference. We have been doing this for months for repatriated persons from the same countries. Same principle pertains, right? But of course now we are responding to the need to float the economy, right? We are looking at more capacity for field monitoring and surveillance as the demand increases, looking at budget to increase the support that we need. And we're looking at even more laboratory capacity so that no tourist can come and say, well, I couldn't get my test. Although that may well be the situation in their country, for the purpose of the product and the safety, we will not be caught with our pants down where testing is concerned. So we are looking at capacity. We have the Public Health England expert on board, and we're looking at upwards of 200 tests per day possible in short order. However, the essential difference is that we are increasing the number of soldiers on our front line because we have had to expand now to increase the persons interacting with persons coming into Anguilla to involve the tourism sector. And as the parliamentary secretary said, this has involved the same infection prevention control training and the use of PPE that healthcare workers do, and the constables and everybody who have been involved in the response so far. But now we've had to increase it. You're looking at more ferry boat and transportation operators and persons in the hotels and so on and so forth necessary. So some of the roles that are being done at the quarantine facilities now analogously will be transitioning to the tourism sector. The extremely good news is that this is not rocket science. The extremely good news, that is on our side. This is not a super bug. It's transmitted the way most respiratory bugs are, mostly by droplet transmission. We're seeing that the same things pertain in terms of the physical distancing and ventilation, which by now you would have maybe realized that that is emerging as a real pearl as countries try to reopen from lockdowns. So much so I remember this article my father sent me from Germany when they were telling the school children, come to school with your blankets because we're leaving the windows open. In the Caribbean, we have the warm climate, we have wide open spaces, and you will see the difference even in the worst hit Caribbean countries, small islands like this, we're not quite experiencing the pandemics as large, densely populated countries, urbanized countries, and so on. I say that not to encourage complacency at all, because this virus has to be respected, but there are mitigating factors that we have in our midst beyond the basic public health measures. But the problem with that is always human behavior. That's the linchpin. We increase the number of persons interacting with guests, we increase the potential for human error, and we increase the potential for transmission. That's absolutely true. As easy as this is to do. It's literally if I'm here and you're over there with COVID, I'm not going to get COVID. And especially if we're on the beach, much less. But how do we ensure that persons who have been trained do the right thing every single time? And that is on us, and we have to own that responsibility. Human behavior is always a linchpin. We still have an extremely controlled situation in Anguilla because we're not seeing the numbers of persons needed to be controlled in terms of the behavior as some other countries. That's the truth. We need to run with that as well. We are seeing in some countries they're dealing with thousands of tourists at a time. Districts and countries, you have personnel, hundreds of personnel all over the country that you have to be hoping that they do the right thing. We don't have that situation in Anguilla, and we should run with that, right? That said, there is an increased risk, and we will be beholden and dependent on persons to do the right thing every time. We have seen where, and it's that easy, and there's contact, and there is contact, right? When we talk about contact with a person with a COVID-19 and possible transmission, there is high-risk contact. Less than 15 minutes, you're hugging, you're kissing, you're handshaking, and you touch your face. Those are the kinds of things that will get us into trouble, particularly if persons are mildly symptomatic, even if they're asymptomatic, a few the questions there in terms of that spread, and definitely if they're symptomatic, right? And we have seen in the past, not just Anguilla, with our historical data, every time there's a flu outbreak in the States, or every time there's a respiratory illness in the States and people come here, we've seen clusters. So we know this can happen. We know this is a critical area of vulnerability, and we have to own it. And I'm reinforcing that because it's easy to do this, and it's easy to make a mistake, and everybody has to be on board with that, amidst the physical distancing and so on. I would also like to admonish us to maintain this healthy respect for the virus, because sadly, and I will say this very, very humbly, and I want to reinforce that as well, the averseness to the risk posed by this virus. I expected as a public health professional, or hoping by this time, that the countries would not be not be so risk averse. And by that I mean, for example, if you compare against swine flu, by the time we had the second wave, people were more comfortable with the idea that people would get infected. We did not see this carnage with swine flu. We're kind of reconciled to the fate. This is going to become seasonal. Right? So we were more open. We are not getting that signal, and I will not pretty it up for you. When we started this reopening talk, the pandemic was not as bad. You put on the TV, CNN, US and UK and whatnot, they are talking about the prospect of lockdowns of different degrees in the face of financial and economic ruin. I'm paying attention. We cannot play with this virus. Dr. Sanjay Gupta was saying, you don't want this virus. Nobody who is in a pandemic, epidemic right now is saying, yeah, we can live with it, and it's not so bad. I'm disappointed and disheartened, and I'm putting it to you. We can't take it for granted, unfortunately. So my next and final point would be to ask the public and myself to have patience, because in public health terms, this is actually not a long haul. This is a snapshot in time. We have at least 6 months to a year to be going through this by all indications. So we have some time in front of us in terms of dealing with this virus. In public health terms, that's a tiny, tiny moment in time. It feels like an eternity, at least to me. But we have to be guided and rest assured that this is just a moment in time. I'm saying that too because persons are getting restless. We want to get back to normal. We want the Ministry of Health not to be so cautious, we're hearing, and so on and so forth. But I will say that, and people are really saying, how long realistically do we think we can maintain such a response? we need to go down in this thing kicking and screaming before we can concede and before we change our status. That's what I'm prepared to do for the next 6 months change. We can do it, right? And we are preparing for the next 6 months to a year to keep up this fight, and hopefully we'll see some real glimmers of hope at the end of this. So again, I'd admonish that these are not normal times. We have it good. There are countries where people are dying, people have lost loved ones, and they might actually prefer to be in our position. So we have to look at that. That notwithstanding, we're beginning to see glimmers of hope even with the tourism product. It's probably not going to be equal opportunity for all involved, but these are not normal times, unfortunately. It cannot be business as usual for a while, right? That said, I mean, we continue to strive on and so on. And I would say to the world and to people who are thinking we're being so careful, I think this is a very good time to come in dead last. Okay? Oh, I forgot the hotline numbers. I usually mix up it's soap and hand, but I'm so tired, sorry. It's for you too?
Okay.
Wait, I have it somewhere. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Chief Medical Officer. So you've heard. So basically, you alluded to, this has to be taken seriously, and the Ministry of Health is tasked with that. And we do know that we have to open the economy. And as we bring people home and as guests come to Anguilla, I just want to remind persons that the stay in place is important, to follow the protocols, because there will be hefty fines for those who violate the protocols or the quarantines or the stay in place. It's $38,400 for the first breach, and 6 months in prison. And certainly nobody wants to come here on vacation and spend it at Her Majesty's prison. So this is serious though, and that's for guests and also for returning Anguillians. So on a more positive note, today you came to hear about reopening and phase 2 and how Anguilla is now opening back up to those of our guests those who have come here before and have enjoyed Anguilla, and those who, because of our beautiful weather, sun, sand, sea, and of course our people, want to come and share with us. So I'll turn it over to the Ministry of Tourism here and the Tourist Board, so they can give us their insights and also answer any questions.
Thanks to all who are tuned in. I will start off by looking at how to get to Anguilla. We welcome all those who wish to visit our shores. The process starts from what the Parliamentary Secretary had indicated on www.i.com. Once you click, what I like to tell individuals, when you click on this, when you get to the I Visit Anguilla site, first thing that you will see would be a pop-up box that says, apply to visit Anguilla. You click and your process has started. You will be taken to a landing page where you are able to start your pre-arrival form or complete your pre-arrival form. When you're done, you submit, click submit, and in a matter of a day to 2 days, your application will be assigned to a concierge agent. And this is what really and truly separates us from the rest, because when you applied, you are not left wondering what is next. You actually have an agent that's going to, it's a handheld entire process where the agents work with you throughout the entire application process until you make your way here to Anguilla. So that I love to boast about, because you have your own personal concierge agent guiding you through the entire process. The agent so what we are requiring from those who seeking to travel to Anguilla, you have to ensure that you have medical or health insurance which covers COVID-19 treatment for a minimum of 30 days. So you have to ensure that you have this, you provide the proof of this to the concierge agent who will be assigned to your application or more likely to your case. Also, you have to ensure that a negative PCR test is taken 3 to 5 days prior to your travel date. That means if, for example, if you are traveling on the 10th of November, you would be required to take your PCR tests 3 to 5 days, either the 5th, the 6th, or the 7th of November. So this is what a lot of individuals ask, when do I? We encourage you to touch base with the concierge agent that's assigned to your case. She will guide you accordingly, but I'm just letting you know that it's 3 to 5 days prior to your travel date. If you're coming on the 10th, you calculate backwards, so you would be required, or we encourage you to take on the 5th, the 6th, or the 7th. I hope this is clear, but again, your personal concierge agent will guide you accordingly. Okay. We also encourage that after you've submitted your negative PCR test, you will get your certificate, your entry approval certificate. Then you are able to travel to Anguilla. However, right now, all our hubs to get to Anguilla, that's St. Martin, St. Thomas, St. Kitts, Antigua, you are encouraged to make sure you are well informed as to their arrival procedures. So we have right now, everyone who applies, the concierge agent will alert you of the different links that you need to go to, depending on the route that you're taking to come to Anguilla. You will have to complete that for arrivals in these transit hubs. So again, you have to look for what is required to enter St. Martin, what is required to enter Antigua, what is required to enter St. Thomas. Coming from Puerto Rico, you will not be faced with the same requirement if you're leaving the U.S. to come through Puerto Rico, from the U.S. to Puerto Rico to Anguilla. But the other hubs, as I indicated, again, Antigua, St. Kitts, St. Thomas, and St. Martin, you are required to complete an application or approval form for these hubs. When you arrive, I think it has been said numerous times, when you arrive on Anguilla, you would have to do a second COVID test. We've been asked, if an individual is tested positive, you produce a negative test for your application, but when you get to Anguilla, you are test positive. What happens to that guest? The guests would first and foremost be isolated in their rooms on their property. And the only time that guests would leave the property is if they need medical treatment. Then the medical team will come into place and do what's necessary to get them to the relevant government facility for treatment. Other than that, the guests will be isolated in their rooms. When you arrive in Anguilla, you go, as the Parliamentary Secretary indicated, to the normal customs and immigration process. When you get, we'll have our trained certified ground transportation operators available at every arrival port. And you will be able to proceed to your property, your host property. You will be required to stay in your room until you have received your test from the PCR test that will be conducted at the port of entry. When you receive your test and negative, you are welcome to enjoy your host property and take part in all the different activities that they have scheduled for you. So I will move on now to speak to the Safe Environment certification process and the Safe Environment approval process. The Safe Environment certification process is actually a certification awarded only to properties and restaurants. So majority of our people in the restaurant sector are quite aware, and in the hotel sector are quite aware as to the process. However, I would like to go through just 1 minute. Normally, we have these individuals reaching out to us in the Ministry of Tourism. We provide you with a safe environment application form, which is to be completed. At the bottom of the form, there is an email address that you use for submission. There is the at-a-glance that we provide with you, which I always tell our people in the restaurant. This is specifically for the hotel, actually. What is required of them, which would be to create your accommodation SOPs, that's Standard of Operating Procedures, ensure the accommodation staff is trained and receive certificates for participation. I will speak to the different training that the Ministry of Tourism, the Ministry of Health, and Health Authority of Anguilla has collaborated in providing for the sector. So ensure all necessary PPEs are available, ensure all necessary hygiene products are available, obtain the certificate of good standing from Inland Revenue Department, complete the Safe Environment Certification form or application form, and submit the completed Safe Environment application form, your SOPs, the proof of training, that is the name of the trained staff, the training sessions, and certificates received for training. Also, the food handler's permit. We stress that every staff that will handle food, that will be handling food on your property, is required to have a food handler's permit. You could always reach out to the Environment Health Unit and speak to them. They will guide you accordingly. When you have obtained all these documents, we ask that you submit it via email to ehu.gov.ai. Sorry, that's ehu@gov.ai, and await correspondence from the Environment Health Unit. They will call and set up an inspection date because the property has to be inspected. After this entire process is done and your Standard of Operating Procedures have been approved, then you will be awarded your Safe Environment certificates. This is a similar process for the restaurants. All the necessary documents and training and so forth are also required. There's a separate Safe Environment application form that is to be completed and also submitted to ehu@gov.ai. The Safe Environment approval process, this one is focused or geared more towards the service providers like the scuba diving, the glass bottom boats, the offshore excursions and so forth that our guests are able to partake in. This one is a simpler process, not as rigorous as the certification. What these service providers are being encouraged to do is to submit your protocols. Your protocols are supposed to show the medical team exactly how you are going to operate during that time. It has to ensure that every aspect of the COVID-19 protocols in terms of social distancing, in hand hygiene, is going to be maintained and adhered to while you are providing the services to the guests. So when you have submitted your protocols, this will be reviewed, vetted by the medical team, who will then provide either remarks, comments, or approval. Once you've done that, we've also ensured that your employees receive either training, or we have a lot of 2 or 3 sensitizing seminars which the service providers could send their employees to. At the end, it's more, they feel more comfortable and more confident to be able to protect themselves and still provide the necessary or the services for our guests to enhance our visitors' experience. So, just before I leave, I just wanted to make mention of the different training, the ongoing trainings. I have to say that we have a strategic and very robust training and sensitizing plan. We want to ensure everyone in the sector gets an opportunity to partake. So we have ongoing proper use of PPE seminars conducted by the Ministry of Health. We have about over 100 mid-level management property personnel attended. We have ongoing safe and ready sensitizing the tourism sector seminars. Up to date, we have about over 100 attendees. We have work and well-being in the hospitality industry seminars that was conducted by the Ministry of Social Development. And we have ongoing safe environment housekeepers. To date, we've trained over 400 housekeepers, which have received certifications for that training. We have done the Safe Environment Ground Transportation training with over 80 ground transportation operators being certified. And we also have the Safe Environment Charter Boat or / ferry transportation training with over 80 participants trained and certified. So if you are interested in receiving training, you can always contact the Ministry of Tourism, the Ministry of Finance, provide your name. We will have you registered and inform you of the day and the time that you have to attend your training. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Andia. So, Ms. Shelia, you're next.
Thank you, Dr. Webster. The Anguilla Tourist Board is responsible for the marketing of the reopening. We began this process in August, and so far it has been going really wonderfully. We have been focused primarily on ensuring that our potential visitors know that the island is open for business and we're welcoming persons. We're very interested in letting them know the procedures for getting to Anguilla, the gateways that are open and operational. What we focused on really is promoting the idea, of course, of Anguilla being the #1 Caribbean island for the 4th time in a row by Travel and Leisure. That's something we're very proud about. We're also proud about the fact that we continue to have no confirmed COVID-19 cases, which is a great selling point for us as a destination in the Caribbean. And we have shown that our health team is capable of ensuring that they know how to keep the destination safe. And this is something that a lot of our guests really, really appreciate. So we've been pushing this as well. We focus on educational, informational, and aspirational content. If you're looking at our platforms, whether through social media, our website, you continue to see videos that tell you a lot about the destination, tell you what's happening. We're ensuring that our guests who may not be able to come to the destination this year are really still enjoying content from the island. We're looking at ensuring that our in-market representatives continue to tell the story about the general Anguilla experience. We've been doing quite a number of webinars with the travel trade as well as the media to remind them that Anguilla is open for business, giving them information on the procedures for coming to the destination. We continue to keep Anguilla top of the mind for all individuals trying to get to the island. That's extremely important. On our social media spaces, we've been ensuring that we've been providing a combination of video content as well as infographics. We have our ATB destination page, which is called Anguilla Generally. If you go there as a potential guest, you'll see all of our video and picture content, all of the information there posted on a daily basis. We also have our head office page that gives information that's even more specific to being on island already. So if you're a guest, you're here, you're on the island, you want to know the restaurants that are opening, that are serving, we have that information there for you posted on a weekly basis. Again, making sure that you have all the information necessary while you're on the island. Another thing that has been really, really important has been our website page. We have the I Visit Anguilla destination website, where you have the escape page that you can fill out your pre-approval form that's there. We also have an experience page that's housed there that can give persons an opportunity to just immerse themselves in everything Anguilla. And of course, we have our digital nomad space that also gives persons who are interested in working from home at the destination all of the information required to come to the island, things that you need to know before you come here. Anguilla is really an amazing place to be able to live in, walk in for an extended period of time, and we are happy to be able to offer our guests that opportunity in a safe and comfortable environment with the reliability and telecommunications that, of course, our guests would be looking for. So the Anguilla Tourist Board has really been focused on ensuring that we keep the destination top of the mind, giving individuals who are interested in coming to the island as much information as possible via all of our social media and digital platforms and digital spaces. So I'd also like to thank the General Head Office team for the work that they have been doing, but also our in-market representatives in the different source markets in the US, in the UK, Canada, Italy, and South America for all of the hard work that they've been doing over the past few months to ensure that persons know that Anguilla is open for business and we are the #1 Caribbean island. Okay? Thank you.
Excellent. Four years in a row, right? So, yes. So, I'd like if there's anybody else at the table wants to add to what was said, or if not, we'll open up for questions.
So we did say to contact the Ministry of Tourism, but no number was given. And the number for the Ministry of Tourism is 1264-497-2547 with the extension 1323. And that will bring you on to Andia or Gina, and they will give you as much information as you need.
By boat, plane, private jet, there are a number of avenues you can get to Anguilla from. You can come via San Juan, Puerto Rico. You can come via St. Martin, Princess Juliana Airport to Anguilla, directly to Clayton J. Lloyd International, or to the Blowing Point Ferry Terminal from Simpson Bay in St. Martin. As you know, the Anguilla St. Martin dock will be operational, so persons can traverse through that. You can also come via Antigua, any of the gateways that lead into Anguilla. Whether you come in by private charter or scheduled flight or boat, you can.
So, what about the French houses?
Well, at this point in time, the French borders are not open, so we'll have to wait until they open, and then we'll look at that possibility.
So I have 3 questions. The fine amount, is that U.S. or is that EC?
Well, we wished it was U.S., but unfortunately it's EC. And just to say, it's you can pay the fine and spend your quarantine in prison for 6 months.
Okay.
So it's your choice. You can either spend your 14 days or 10 days in a stay-in-place facility, whether it's the government facility, the property of choice, or you can spend it at a Green Hotel. It's really up to you.
Okay. The second question is the medical COVID insurance. Is that easy to find? I've seen some things online where people seem to say, where can we find this COVID medical insurance?
Now, what we tell the individuals who do reach out and ask for that we are not looking for specific COVID insurance. What we are saying to them is go to your insurance agency and find out if the current agency, the current coverage that you have covers COVID-19 treatment outside your region, because that's the main problem for some. Majority of the individuals who have Medicare have indicated that we are good to go. We reached out and our agency has said that we are okay. When we leave the U.S., we will be covered for any ailments or incidents while at the destination. So it's not asking for specific COVID-19 insurance, but ensuring that your medical policy and your health insurance policy would cover COVID-19 treatment outside of your region or internationally, would say.
Okay, thank you. And my last question is the guided bubble for people who are here less than the 10 or 14 days. For the general public that live here, how will we know when they're out and about in this bubble? Are they going to be wearing a band? Are they going to have a mask on? Should we have a mask on? Just health precautions.
For the guided bubble, and I want to make an example of something that have previously occurred that we all know about. We know we had a high-profile tourist that was here recently, and he too was on a guided bubble. So what the bubble envisages is that if you're staying at a particular property, you can travel to a restaurant, to an offshore key, to the golf course on reservation, and you will only do so by certified ground transportation. So that person should never come in contact with the general population because they are picked up at the villa, they pick up at the Airbnb, they pick up at the hotel, and they're taken directly to that. There's no detours to Ken Barbecue. They're taken directly. They're taken directly to. taken directly to. taken directly to the golf course, or taken to the shoreline where they will travel over to Siliki, or they will travel over to Sander Island or the lake. So you should never come in contact with the general population.
Yeah, but further to that, it's important to realize, further to what the minister is saying, there's no out and about for those folks, right? But there will be some who have cleared quarantine, who will be obviously visitors. So we have to make that distinction. So that's very important. And just to reinforce that we, with these bubbles and guided movements, you're really not violating the principle of quarantine overly much. It speaks of restricted movements and restricted interaction. So that principle still maintains, actually. But there are layers, right? So we've relaxed the layer a little bit, but the principle of quarantine still pertains. So there's no out and about for them.
If I may add, a significant amount of persons that are looking to come to Anguilla are long-stay tourists, if you want to call it that. And once they have cleared quarantine, and once they are medically cleared, then you will see them out and about. Then you will see them at the restaurants freely. Then you will see them using a car rental. But unless you have gotten to that stage, you will not be allowed to use a car rental. You will not be out and about, and everything will be totally controlled. Everything is on reservations. Everything is on bookings. So everything is basically truly and truly contained and controlled.
And to add to that, we know exactly who is coming to Anguilla, when they come into Anguilla, when they're going to arrive, where they go to. So at some point in time, if you see a tourist out in the community, that person has been cleared. Because we will not, of course, the chief medical officer will not let anybody out in the public unless they're cleared. Now, the concept of the bubbles is basically the concept of quarantine spread a little wider. We have been doing bubbles, we have been doing 5 bubbles here for the last 8 months, 6 months. We have our quarantine centers. We had to move people back and forth to hospital and so forth. We've had to move people from one quarantine center to the next. And the persons managing these quarantine centers live in the community. So all of the nurses and doctors and stuff have not been living in the quarantine centers. They do their shifts there, but through the proper protocols and proper procedures, when their shift done, they go back home. So this is a type of training we've been doing with the public and with the hospitality people and with the ground transport and with the boat owners, so that they can follow the same protocols to ensure that we interact with the visitors safely.
Is that we have not had any persons who have tested positive with the repatriation, or persons who have come to Anguilla staying in villas and what have you. We have not had anyone tested positive. We all know that we have had 3 positive cases in Anguilla very early in this journey. And we have had persons who have had to interact with them, and that the COVID has not transferred to them. And that is because they used the protocols and they protected themselves and they took the responsibility upon themselves to ensure that that did not happen. So it's incumbent on everyone who's working in these bubbles, even in the moving bubble, to take personal responsibility to not let their guard down, not because someone has tested negative twice, once before coming to Anguilla and once on arrival, means that they are necessarily negative. So it is up to you to ensure that you keep that in the back of your mind. That person have not cleared the incubation period. It may be indeed positive. So it's up to every one of us to take personal responsibility for our own safety and ensure that whatever the protocols that you have to adhere to, the standard operating procedures by every one of these establishments that has been established, that you adhere to them to the T to protect yourselves, your family, and the community.
I just want to add that persons who are concerned about interaction between the ordinary public and guests must also realize that as it stands right now, any facility offering services to tourists are not offering services to guests at the same time. So if you are a restaurant who decided to opt into the bubble, whether you decide to opt into the bubble for a certain amount of days or your entire operation will be linked to the bubble, it means that you cannot have locals there. The offshore keys, if you decide that your restaurant will be part of the bubble, it means that service will only be available to guests. So we're having a distinct offering of services where they won't be mixing of persons. And that's also why the training was so important, because every person who is trained has now the ability to see signs and also call the reporting hotlines. And I will just repeat the number again. For any person operating in the bubble, providing a service, whether you are a housekeeper or you're a general manager, you have a responsibility to report because you too are part of our surveillance team. And the number to do so is 476-HAND or 476-4263 or 584. Sorry. 476-SOAP. That's 7627 or 584-HAND. That's 4263. Thank you. Right, so you're all part, and these numbers are public numbers, and they will continue to be publicized. But we have all these up to the 500 persons we've trained. All of these persons would know the signs and know that they have the confidence, and they can call anonymously to these tip lines and let us know if there's any person breaking these quarantine rules. But the moving bubble is a safe idea because it still considers the key points of good public health practice, which is social distancing, and there will be no intermixing with the general public.
Good morning. Two quick questions for the time being, because I know many persons here have questions to ask as well. Dr. Enduring, you mentioned that we are reopening when the pandemic has worsened, and I know, Mr. Rogers, you alluded to that persons too are concerned. I know last evening the government of Anguilla, in collaboration with the St. James School of Medicine, held a COVID-19 seminar. Are there any plans from the ministry to perhaps engage an aggressive public health campaign for the public? I know many persons are asking about wearing masks and so forth. What would be your suggestion to the public? That's my number one question so far.
Well, certainly. I mean, this is part of that campaign and interaction, and so too the symposiums that we've had with St. James. We're also working on revamping and freshening the material that we have online with the beatcovid19.com. So yes, because we keep saying that with the approach, WHO always says, and we know in public health, the communication is an important aspect. So we seize on these opportunities. I know the PALSEC has also done her rounds and so on, and this is all part of that public interaction and public education campaign. Specifically, as it relates to masks, we do have a mask policy. We have implemented a mask policy that is, I keep saying, is quite appropriate to what we are experiencing here with our no-case transmission scenario. And it's not by preference or opinion, it's really based on the WHO guidelines. I invite people to read for themselves, look online and see the different caveats and the nuances of the mask use policy. We have our what we call source control at this time. What folks are alluding to is what is called universal masking. I have no problem with masking of any kind, even universal masking. I have a huge problem and a huge issue with the specter of community transmission. And that is where you find the universal masking implemented. That's my concern. And the main caveat by the public health industry, sector is talking about the sense of false security when people talk about just put a mask on everybody. It's so much more loaded, and you have to do the other things right. When you talk about the infection control pyramid, the PPEs, including masks, are actually at the bottom. The other things, they have to be done in combination with the other things, and they have to be done well. Part of the reason is that when you get down to that bottom part of the pyramid, it relies a lot on human behavior and human responsibility, right? So there's that, there's issues around proper usage, there's issues around supplies and the quality and so on. They work, they have a role, but they have to be appropriately implemented. And again, I encourage you to check, and the guidance is long, but look at the tables, right? And it summarizes everything we've done. We continue to do everything based on good public health. I want to share also that I think what is happening with this anxiety, particularly around masks, we are seeing what is happening in the US. Their scenario is quite different, and they will say at points that this is all they have in their armamentarium. The other things were lost. The other things like the testing, the isolation, quarantine, and contact tracing, still they're not getting on top of, so that's the tool. We're in a different place. We don't want to get there. We don't want to ever get in that position. You also have countries like New Zealand and Australia who have done a bit better, who have introduced in public transportation and already stepped back because there's a sustainability element, there's a fatigue, there are all sorts of considerations. So we're not in the business of making proclamations even when they're convenient. We continue to do things really, really based on public health science, and it's out there. But please check the guidance on WHO. I invite you to read for yourself and see what the recommendations are around masks, and you see what we have done is well in order. You will read from the protocols that the visitors coming in are required through ports of entry, transit, and whatnot, and we can speak to that as well.
My second question, I know next week CAFRA is launching 2 initiatives. Something with the stamp of approval. I'm just wondering, are we also part of that?
Trainings, and we have access to the CARFA trainings, and we continue to be in the CARFA network. We have one on the ground for scheduled for November 12th. We had one this week. We had one before. We continue to collaborate with them in their tourism and health program, where that comes from. We do have our country-specific certification, but it does incorporate the same CARFA training.
Yeah, I think in Anguilla's context, we were using the word safe environment because we're thinking beyond COVID, right? We don't want to set up a program simply for COVID. COVID will come to an end at some point in time, either through some sort of cure or some sort of immunization or something at some point in time. We are thinking about best practice going forward. So we're not calling ours COVID safe, we call ours safe environment.
Admonish those, especially you in the press, to really ask as many questions as possible, because invariably we have these press conferences, and then after the press conference we get more questions than we have at the press conference. So as many as we can before we open would be really appreciated.
You mentioned that we are receiving our first guests on November 1st. Do you have an idea what those numbers look like?
I can tell you that the numbers are soft for the short stay guests at this time. It's, which is understandable. Persons are still afraid to travel. There's a number of things that we are now rolling out that we didn't envision 2 weeks ago. So our destination is becoming more attractive as we move along, and I'm sure it's going to continue to do so. But initially, where we were a couple months ago, where we were 6 weeks ago, we are much further along now. So persons are looking at Anguilla as a destination of choice right now. So those numbers will increase, but I can tell you that the numbers are very soft in the initial stages.
Hayden, you made reference to a number of things that you're rolling out. Can you be a bit more specific in some of the things that are being to be rolled out?
Well, I think that we covered a number of them in the initial stages, but just to say, golf, we spoke about golf, scuba diving, and these are businesses that have already been certified. Some of them have already been certified. Scuba diving, snorkeling, kayaking, glass bottom boat tours, offshore keys excursions, offshore keys and private lunches, dining, safe environment certified restaurants, outdoor yoga, outdoor fitness hikes, on property indoor fitness activities, and beach activities. Now, we are still admonishing everybody to submit your protocols and submit your standard operating procedures for perusal and approval. Because as we continue to evolve, this is going to be immensely important. And so everyone who has not done it as yet, whether you're a boat operator, because when we look at what we have right now, very few of the boat operators have submitted their protocols. And when November 1st comes around, you're going to be inundating our team with telephone calls trying to rush them, when we have been saying for some weeks now that you need to submit, So we are still admonishing persons to do so if you want to participate in this COVID reality.
You made reference earlier to establishments being being included in a bubble, for example, restaurants. Is there a list compiled of restaurants that are going to be in the bubble? Because we know that a lot of locals now are going to restaurants, and has there been a list compiled that would notify locals who are interested in going to restaurants but are not aware that they may be placed in a bubble? The restaurants are placed in a bubble.
There are a number of restaurants that have chosen not to be part of the bubble. Those restaurants most likely will cater for locals and persons who have already cleared quarantine. A lot of them have decided that they will not participate. Some of those that are participating in the COVID tourism reality, they have submitted protocols. They're being looked at, and a few of them, I believe, have been approved already. And remember, there's a number of different bubbles. Take, for example, the Four Seasons. The Four Seasons is a bubble in itself. And then there's a Meads Bay bubble. And even though Four Seasons is the one and the Maliohana, the book ends the Meads Bay Beach, they have their separate bubbles. And then there's a bubble that includes places such as Straw Hat, Karama, Frangipani, and the lake. So there are different bubble concepts, but then there's also the ability to move from the Four Seasons bubble to the Siliki bubble, right? So, this is what we're talking about.
What's going to happen, in particular to Meads Bay, with reference to guests from Four Seasons and locals using that beach?
Well, the chief medical officer spoke to that before, that the beach is an open environment, and as long as you adhere to the social distance protocols and what have you, you should be fine. And I hope that she can expound on that a little bit.
We're looking at, in terms of beach access, for example, the Four Seasons, they have their area right there. They have committed to these persons and villas that have the beach right in front of them to have the security, beach wardens, and so on to ensure that persons don't stray. And we're talking about wide expanses of beaches. They will be basically locked off from the rest of the public, and they will be on basically the beach in front of their properties and so on. So we're not looking at tourists who have not cleared quarantine wandering all over any beach. That's not the idea either. It's still restricted in terms of the location and the geography. So, and we're looking at beach wardens as part of the agreement, and that is described in the protocol. How does this work? Who you're going to hire? Who is going to see that persons are there monitoring?
Mrs. Rogers-Webster, you mentioned that the ATB is responsible for the marketing Anguilla at this time. Could you tell us where some of our guests are coming from? Are they coming from the US, Europe? And I know that Canada is an initiative that the ATB is looking at because their numbers are low. So can you tell us about Canada and perhaps Latin America and, whatever else?
Sure. The numbers that we are seeing are very much in line with what we see normally in terms of percentages. So our guests are coming predominantly from the U.S. As you know that over 60-something% of our guests normally come from the U.S. That is remaining the same. We do have some interest from Europe, but it's quite low. We don't have much interest from South America, but predominantly from the U.S. So that's where we're seeing a lot of our numbers. We're seeing our snowbirds who usually come for extended periods of time, some who have villas here, some who have homes here, or some that just come to stay to visit. So predominantly that's what we're seeing. We are seeing a number of short stay visitors as well, but not as much as those coming for the extended periods of time.
I just want to address a question that is being posed online. And the question is about tourists staying for a longer period of time within the bubble and then leaving the bubble, if they can go back to the restaurant amenities that is offered by that particular hotel. And the answer is no. The answer is no. If you have decided, if there will be a separation of those persons who are staying for a long period of time and staying for a shorter period of time. So let us say, for example, you're staying at Hotel A, and you have booked for a period of more than 14 days, and someone else have booked for a period of 3 days. Those people, it is envisaged that they'll stay separate, right? And they're still separate. Now, as it relates to the restaurant and so forth, those that are staying for short term, they will have their seat in one area. Those who are staying for a longer term, they'll have their seat, so they keep people separate. Once that person is medically cleared at day 14, for example, then they are free to leave the bubble and to rent a vehicle. And that in itself, it comes with its own risk. And this is something that we have to be able to manage as well.
There are a couple of persons on the live still asking about, maybe they joined the live a bit late, asking about utilizing the restaurant services while on island. Once you're still in that bubble period. And you can have access to restaurants that have been certified on island. However, you have to get a certified ground transportation provider that's going to take you directly to the restaurant and directly back to the property. So there is movement that's available. Everything is going to be done by reservation. So that is available. So there are a number of persons who continue to ask about that. A number of persons also asked about taking the tests earlier than required and being let out of quarantine. That is not available. It is not appropriate. It is not in line with what the government of Anguilla has decided to do. So that is not going to be available. So you can't go to an off-site, I think someone referenced Hughes Medical Center to get a test early and leave. That is not going to be possible. So we don't want you to do that. Okay?
And also another question that is being raised is whether or not persons can come to Anguilla via charter boat for the day, and that is not allowable. At this present time, we are not allowing day trippers to come to Anguilla via charter boat coming out of St. Martin or anywhere else.
But Peter, just to follow up on that, you made reference to areas that are the beach, the dark lake area to the beach. What if an individual wants to go to Sandy Ground or Kirkland Pier from as a day trip?
From Anguilla? No, it's not allowable. Not right now. It's not allowable. Day trippers are not allowable from Anguilla or from St. Martin. If you go to St. Martin for the day, prepare to be quarantined for 2 weeks and return.
Yeah,
but I just want to address one more question. The question was whether or not someone can go from one bubble to the next. Let's say you're staying at Shoal Bay Villas and you're in a bubble at Shoal Bay Villas and you want to go to a restaurant at Four Seasons. At this present time, via certified ground transportation, you can do so. So basically you're going from, if the property is allowing it, then you can do so. So you're going from one bubble to the next.
So just to add, everything is done via reservations, and we have worked with we are speaking to the restaurants, speaking to the hotels, ensuring that movements, like what the minister has just spoke about, is managed and guided. That's why it's called guided movement. So that an individual could not pick up and call a taxi and say, take me to Four Seasons, if Four Seasons permit this. They would have to reach out to the reservations or the guest attendants at the hotel and say, okay, I would like to attend, I would like to have dinner at, let's say, Ember. Then Ember has to be notified, and everything is knowing that this individual is coming at that time, ensuring that this person is brought into the restaurants, social distance is adhered to. So it's not that it's, again, anybody could just decide, I'm going to move here, go there. No, everything is guided. Reservations and booking, that's how we are moving the guests who will be here and unable to clear quarantine, moving them to the different activities. So just want to emphasize this.
And to add to that, if you are staying at Malihana Hotel, for example, or you're staying at Karama, and you want to dine at the Straw Hat that is within the bubble, and you can actually walk on the beach via guided security or beach warden to Straw Hat to have a meal at Straw Hat, provided that you have made a reservation to dine at Straw Hat. No. No, not at the same time.
So just a point of clarification then. If a restaurant has decided they want to be in the bubble, then, and you said Straw Hat, so I'll use them as an example. So I like Straw Hat, but I won't be able to go to Straw Hat to eat or any other restaurant if they are designated as a bubble restaurant?
Well, no, unless we have allowed for. Some of the restaurants have provided protocols whereas they will be in the bubble for a particular amount of days and outside of the bubble for a particular amount of days for locals. They have presented their protocols. None of them have been certified as yet, if I'm not mistaken, but they are under consideration. So if you like a particular restaurant that is within the bubble and they have provided the protocols to ensure that your safety will be guaranteed, and the team decides that that will be allowed, then that will be allowed. So on those days that they are, sorry? Right, there's also delivery. But on those days that you, that they will be allowing you to come in, there will be no tourists. And on those days that you are, that the tourist is there, you are not allowed. And that is a vision. We have not gotten there yet, but we're very ready.
And I think it's kind of important for folks to understand that really between now and December, January, we're really looking to salvage that so-called festive market. So all indications are that there's a rich market there, and we're trying with this bubble concept to still capture those. People should be heartened to know that we have a significant proportion of longer stays coming in the next months to the New Year's, who will be clearing quarantine. So there's a very strategic and deliberate approach, and I see it as it's actually a short-term thing, looking critically at how we could salvage a festive season.
Okay. So there are two questions that I want to respond to. One relates to how will visitors or persons know which days are reserved for whether guests or locals. What we encourage persons to do is to, one, follow the ATB pages, because we will give information as it relates to restaurants that are open and operational, but also you should follow the local Facebook pages of your favorite restaurants. They've been really good at providing information in real time as things change, as things develop. So I encourage persons to do that. Also, the properties that guests will be staying at, all the concierges will be aware of the schedules of the restaurants to be able to provide guests with that information. So that isn't something that persons should be worried about. Also, you can always just call the restaurant to find out what are the days that they're open and operational to the local public or to visitors if they're offering that. So that information will be readily available. There's also a question as it relates to what marketing initiatives have the ATB employed to increase the interest and tap into the markets of other continents. At this time, the ATB has very limited resources for marketing initiatives. So it's very, very important for us to target the low-hanging fruit, the persons that we know can come to the destination. When travel is up and running as previous, then we can explore tapping into new markets. Because, of course, persons know that when you're going into new markets, there's quite a bit of heavy investment that has to happen in the initial stages for you to really be able to bear fruit. So right now, this isn't the time that the ATB is going to explore going into new markets. We know the markets that have done very well for the destination, and we're really focused on ensuring that we continue to serve those markets and encourage persons from those markets to visit.
Good. One thing two questions I want to respond to from the live as well. And that is, will police officers be utilized to do checks of these different bubbles, including restaurants, etc.? And we have multiple persons who will be operating in our surveillance team. So some of the persons will be from the Ministry of Health will be going on to do certain checks on the facilities. And also we have our special constables that we have been utilizing since our border closure, who are responsible and experienced in doing these checks to ensure that we are safe. So this will occur. The second question is, persons coming from the Caribbean countries with low COVID-19 cases, will they stay less days in quarantine or stay the same 14 days? And the answer is less days if your prevalence is under 0.2%, and the less days would be 10 days. So we have a quarantine range of 10 or 14 days. If you're coming from a place of low prevalence, then it's 10 days, higher prevalence, 14 days. There was a question?
This question is pertaining to the bubble concept. The workers that are working in the bubble, how can you guys assure them after they leave work in the bubble, they have to go home to their families? They are going to be putting their families at risk. How can you guys? That was a question.
Yeah, sure. First of all, that's the purpose of the training. We have that existing right now, as the DPS said, with the persons working at the quarantine facilities and so on, right? And remember, we have a lot of testing, and there's a principle of epidemiology. You have the agent or the germ, the host, and the environment. We will be testing persons in such a manner that we'll be catching positive cases and so on, right? So there's also that as well. But that's also the backbone of that will be the training of the persons, which is we're undergoing right now, in infection prevention control, which includes the proper use of PPE, the physical distancing, the hand hygiene, to protect against that. So that's the answer to that.
Dr. Andrew, now Mr. Rogers, perhaps you can speak to the capacity supports. You mentioned earlier budgetary increase in the budget as well as the PPEs and so forth. So could you tell us about more testing and what plans are in the works for that?
So with regard to the testing, we are embarking on establishing what we call an open platform mechanism. It's essentially a PCR machine that can handle more tests at a time. Right now, we're on a gene expert that does 4 at a time. Turnaround time is 1 hour, but you can only handle 4 specimens at a time. So this new machine will be able to handle 96 specimens at a time with a little bit longer turnaround period, but you can see where you have exponentially increased the number of samples that can be processed at a time. And again, this is within, well within a 24-hour period for the results. So that's how we're going to augment our testing. And remember, this is as opposed to when we started on this journey, when we had to send samples to CARFA, we're getting the results 4 to 7 days later, so this is well advanced. And this gives me opportunity to say that the lovely thing about establishing this laboratory capacity in country is beyond COVID. We'll be able to test for all kinds of viruses, other respiratory viruses, the flu, dengue, and the gene expert machine also has the ability to do viral load for HIV. So there's a lot in terms of capacity going forward with the laboratory.
In terms of the human resources, as you know, government quarantine comes to an end the middle of November. The last persons that will be accepted into government quarantine would be tomorrow, actually. Repatriation finishes, so that 2-week period would take us to the middle of November. So currently the plan is to all the staff we have in government quarantine, we'll be using those now to transition to the community, to do surveillance checks, to do the temperature checks, to do all of the well-being checks over the entire island. In addition to that, though, we are looking at the more human resources, because certainly when more people go into home quarantine, then it increases the need for more staff. But currently we have 16 staff hired. They will be transitioning between the home quarantine, surveilling the hotels and port health, and we're looking to get more staff now to increase that capacity.
Having charter a yacht or a boat out of St. Martin to come to visit the offshore keys, that is not allowable. That is not allowed. If you want to charter a boat or a yacht to go to the offshore keys, we have enough here in Anguilla that you can utilize.
Another question from the web is that, can someone fly into St. Martin and then take a ferry to Anguilla?
Well, provided that they have already applied and they have uploaded their negative PCR tests and they have had approval, definitely they can do so.
Current regulations in Angola does not allow anybody to enter without approval of this lady here. So if you don't show up on a port with a document from her saying you're approved to enter, you can't enter Angola. That's just the way the laws are right now. In addition to that, no boat can enter Angola waters without the approval of the Commissioner of Police. That's just the way it is. And we have to be sure that we keep these controls in place for a while longer so we can manage the importation of any positive cases. So if we can't manage the importation of a case and isolate them, then it's going to be problematic. So really and truly, ferries coming from St. Martin, charters from St. Martin, no boat can enter Angola waters right now without the approval of the Commissioner of Police.
And just to remind persons that you will not be able to come through the French side through the regular ferry, so you have to come through the Dutch side through our scheduled charter boats, or use the airport to use Anguilla Air Services or Trans-Anguilla to come through St. Martin. Okay.
Another question was asked is if Seaborne still flies from San Juan.
Currently, Seaborne is not flying from San Juan, but they do intend to start operations again. They're looking at load factors and interest. So by the end of the month, they will make some decisions on coming into the end of November to make some decisions on coming back into the destination and how frequently. But in the beginning stages, it will more than likely be once a week, usually probably on a Saturday. But in the initial stages, it will just probably be once a week. And we're hoping that that might start in sometime in December. But for now, C1 is not operational. into Anguilla.
We've also started discussions with other aviation companies to do the San Juan Anguilla route. We have not gotten to the point where they have committed yet, but they would like to start December. I believe it is November, December of this year. And once that happens, then we'll be able to make an announcement to the general public. I just want to address one of the other questions that is raised on the social media platform. And this is from a gentleman who's asking the question about his family in the UK and some in the US want to stay at their home in Anguilla. If that is something that he desires to do, then he need to contact the Environmental Health Department at Kathleen.Rogers2, the number 2, at gov.ai, so that they can inspect. You submit your protocol so they can inspect it and ensure that you can be certified before you can do so. So it's a possibility, but you must just follow the rules of engagement. There's other questions as it relates to the persons that are working in the bubble and whether or not they'll be given a shower before leaving the bubble. I'll allow the Honorable Parliamentary Secretary to take this question.
I think that question might be more suited to the CMO, but this is an airborne virus, and if the virus is in your lungs, taking a bath is not going to, a respiratory virus, it's not going to change the fact that the virus is in your lungs, and that's why persons working on the property will be trained on how to operate in that environment so that it doesn't have to get to that. I'd like to end this morning. We have one more question, and then we're about to come to a close.
It was mentioned earlier by Mr. Rogers in reference to that the government quarantine bubble gonna end on this weekend. What's gonna happen to persons, say locals returning home? Will they be quarantined in a specified area, or will they be quarantined home?
It depends. We anticipate that most persons will be able to quarantine at home based on current decisions made, but there are some persons who will not have the capacity to quarantine at home. Maybe living conditions, maybe who they're living with, and those type of things. If an inspection is done and it indicated that a person can quarantine at home, then those persons have to give alternate arrangements, will be able to quarantine for the 2 weeks before they can be released to go at home.
I think it's important to make the distinction between government quarantine, government facilities, and government approved. So the quarantine stays, but we will not be holding all the facilities and paying for them as we are now. But there will always be quarantine with a government approved location.
So what you do is you go on the site, you apply to come home, you indicate where you'd like to quarantine. The inspection is done. If it can be done there, it will be done there. If it can't be done there, then you'd have to indicate an alternate site, and we can inspect that site as well, and we'll make arrangements to have that done.
Just to add that a lot of persons have been frustrated over the last few weeks about the inability to quarantine at home. And the reason why that inability to quarantine at home has not been there is because we fear that persons, Anguillians, would breach quarantine and get out into the community and have some community spread. What we have realized is that in other Caribbean islands, those community spreads that have occurred have almost 100% occurred because the local people believe that they do not have to quarantine, and in some instances have breached quarantine and there have been community spread. So that is why we have had an apprehension to allow for home quarantine. Now we are evolving to the point where we will allow home quarantine, but we have ensured that we have some stringent legislation that ensures that if you breach that quarantine, there are consequences, and you won't be able to call my number and ask for mercy. And I'm sure you won't be able to call the number of the Parliamentary Secretary or the Premier and ask for mercy, because at the end of the day, while we may be the lawmakers, we are not the law enforcers, and those penalties will be enforced to the strictest measure of the law, which the Premier have said before, it's $38,400. Maybe we may make it US. But right now it's 38,400 EC dollars and 6 months in prison for breaching protocol. So it's up on us, for us to protect ourselves. Every one of us have family members who are vulnerable. And yes, you may have tested negative before you came to Anguilla. You may have tested negative on arrival to Anguilla, but that does not mean that you're negative. So we are admonishing everyone who is given the opportunity and privilege to home quarantine to stick to the home quarantine and do not breach and do not allow anyone to breach, because we will have constables, we will have the Royal Anguilla Police Force, we will have surveillance, and the general public will be looking at you. And if you do so, there will be severe consequences to your actions.
Let me just add something to what the minister just said. There is no way the government can maintain the cost of quarantine. It is just prohibitively expensive. We have done it for the last 6 months since June, and it has cost millions of dollars. Beginning at closer to the end, beginning 1st of September, we began to charge a little bit for a person quarantine. We did not charge the full economic cost. We could not, because we realized it would have been too hefty. But even what we charged was still very expensive for a lot of people who couldn't really do it. So at this stage now, people have to realize that they have a social responsibility, not only to themselves, but to the country, to ensure that they behave properly and that they respect the rules of the engagement. But in addition to that, we will be having surveillance in place. Any person who's home quarantined will have to be checked 3 times a week by the health team, for temperature checks, well-being checks, and so forth. In addition to that, they'll be randomly checked by the Anguilla Police Force to ensure that they're home. Anybody breaching, and we have to be very, very strong on this. We have to be very, very strong on this. Anybody found in breach will be dealt with the full extent of the law. It is a small society. It is a small country, and we have to ensure that we protect the people of Angola with limited resources. Our hospital is just 32 beds. In addition to that, we have about another 10 beds for COVID-related cases, 8 ventilators. We cannot allow this virus to overreach and overrun the country. So we're making a step to ensure that people quarantine at home, as you've been asking, but with that comes your responsibility. And I must say that responsibility is an onerous one. Most people, if you're coming from the UK and the US, you know what it is like out there. You know what it is like out there. Those countries with a lot of resources cannot manage what's happening. In Wisconsin right now, they're setting up a field hospital just outside of Milwaukee because the main hospitals are 90% full to capacity. So they're now starting a hospital outside to ensure that there's overflow, that they can cope. We cannot get to that state in Anguilla. So we're asking people when they come in and they're quarantined at home, please ensure that you follow the rules of engagement, because we'll be very tough with people who break quarantine.
I know you want to end, but I have one quick question. We keep saying quarantine, quarantine. Could you just quickly go over the parameters or the boundaries of a home quarantine? If I'm quarantining, am I in my bedroom and nobody can come in there and visit? What exactly does home quarantine entail?
Well, that's why we have to assess the house. Because certainly if we assess the house and you have other people in there who have been in Angola for the last 8-10 months and you're now coming in, you won't be able to quarantine there. You won't be able, that's just common sense. If the house is designed in such a way that is an apartment offshoot, or there's a basement or our own stuff, and there's ways to limit interaction between, then we can consider that, certainly. But regular quarantine does not allow for the mixing of persons. It can't, right? However, if a family comes in together, they've been living in the US together, and they come in together, they can quarantine together. There's no need to separate them because they live together to begin with. But there's no, quarantine does not allow persons coming in to mingle and mix with persons already here.
Thank you all for attending, both those in person and those on the live. Lots of important questions and this information will be presented in a way that all of it will be in one spot. Frequently asked questions can be found on ivisitangula.com, and there is a FAQ section, where you can come and see the answers to most of the frequently asked questions, and it's updated weekly. I would like to also thank the teams who are doing a tremendous job on the lives, answering all the questions that we have. Those behind the curtains, I should say, our chairman, Mr. Kenroy Hubbard, Jamil Rochester, Gina Brooks, Molentia Samuels, and those persons at this table, our CMO, Dr. Aisha Andrewen, our Permanent Secretary of Health, Mr. Foster Rogers, Minister of Health, Mr. Hayden Hughes, of course, our Premier, our Minister of Tourism, Mr. Hayden Hughes, our Minister of Finance and Health, our Premier, our Research Officer, Andy Reverea, and the Manager of Corporate Affairs, Michelle Rogers-Webster, and of myself, Parliamentary Secretary, Quincy Gomes-Marie. Thank you all for tuning in, and we are looking forward to providing more information. We hope that you feel more confident in this process, because it is a process that we are all involved in. And just before I close, I want to remind persons, especially those persons who have underwent the training, who are operating in hotels, villas, offering different services. If you have any issues, if you need to make any calls, if you need to report anything, you are part of a reporting mechanism, and the numbers are 584-HAND 4263 or 476-SOAP 7627. Thank you for tuning in.